Okay, well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday. And as per normal, I'm going to go ahead and start out with the news of the week. So the first bit here is the Biden administration has just imposed a 200% tariff. Oh, let me also change this to speaker view. A 200% tariff on aluminum that's coming from Russia. Now, aluminum, of course, is a major product within the manufacturing of solar panels. So the thought is this may impact solar panel prices in the future. Russia accounts for about 6% of the world's aluminum supply. And in 2022, the U.S. imported about $673 million worth of solar panels. So that's, again, to assume to have a big impact on the solar industry. A new study here has shown that renewables grew by about 9.6% worldwide in 2022, adding 295 gigawatts of generating capacity worldwide, bringing that up to 3,372 gigawatts. China far and away led this. They accounted for about half of all of the new renewable energy installations worldwide. Followed, they brought in 141 gigawatts. Europe followed second with about 57 gigawatts. North America, third place, 29 gigawatts. And it was interesting in all of these numbers to find how distant, how far behind Africa ranks in installation. They, in 2022, only installed about 2.7 gigawatts. Currently, worldwide, the amount of renewable energy is split fairly evenly between hydro, solar, and wind. China accounts for about 392 gigawatts worldwide. And then in second place at about 111 is the USA. Rounding out the top five, there's Japan, then Germany, and in fifth place as far as embedded renewables is India. And NREL has been doing a lot of research on Perovskite. Those guys who know me know I'm very bullish on Perovskite as a new technology. And some of the advantages, of course, of Perovskite is it's very high efficiency. In the field, it typically runs 25 to 29%. It has very low embedded energy because you're not melting silicon to create these things. In fact, the way they're created is typically embedding multiple layers of calcium titanium oxide onto glass. And what the NREL study has shown is you can combine many of these applications and skip many of the steps and actually find that the panel will continue to produce. It's much cheaper to produce, but it's also will retain its efficiency. They found about 90% efficient after 3 years. So one of the reasons why Perovskite has not been commercially successful as of yet, really 3 reasons. It did leach out some lead, but they've addressed that. So there was that issue that delayed it. Then there was stability issues in the field. Would it succumb to deteriorate under extreme conditions of moisture and heat? They pretty much addressed that as well. Now the remaining issue with Perovskite being a commercially successful is price. Can it be manufactured at a cost point that is competitive with silicon? And so they're thinking that this research may really go a long way towards making Perovskite a competitive technology. So we'll see how that develops over the next few years. This was an interesting study that found that women are reluctant to purchase electric vehicles, much more reluctant than men. And it's primarily because of safety concerns during the charging process. Something I hadn't, of course, thought about, which is interesting. In fact, up to this point, women only account for about 30% of the purchases of electric vehicles, while according to Edmunds, the ones who did this study, women account for about 62% of all of the vehicle purchases. So significant difference there. The women cite a lack of abundant infrastructure for charging. So there's a concern that you're going to run out of electricity and be stranded. Also, the fact that these charging stations are often put in the back of facilities in relatively isolated locations. There's nobody manning them, not like a gas station attendant. So there's a concern that because it takes a fair long time to charge this, that you are subject to, there are concerns of personal safety during that. So that's something that the EV charging industry is going to have to address. A new analysis by NREL has tried to analyze what are the impacts of the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bill that were passed in 2022. And what they concluded is that assuming no states go out and try and mess with this by passing anti-renewable legislation, that the US grid could be up to 90% carbon neutral by the year 2030. That's only 7 years away. So they're saying that between 71% and 90% carbon neutral. Now, carbon neutral does include nuclear, so it's not all renewables, but it is significant. This confirms a study that took place in 2022 by Princeton University. And what they've said is the economic benefit of this, they're anticipating that this reduction in CO2 emissions, which represents about 72 to 91% reduction over 2005 levels, will save about $160 to $230 billion in climate-related costs, as well as between $20 and $46 billion in health-related costs. And that's pretty much the news for this week. Does anybody have any comments on anything there or anything else they'd like to provide as an update? Since I've got everybody on the line. Give you just a second.
Jay, it's Don.
Yeah.
I was going to let you know it's not out yet, but I saw the news the tax news last week that they should be coming out with regulations on the percentages required for the different EVs and other things.
Oh, okay.
Well, I'll believe it when I see it, but they had an announcement saying it should be out by the end of the week. A lot of updates.
That's from the Inflation Reduction Act?
Yeah, the IRS had a notice out.
Yeah, there's a lot of aspects that I'm sure it's going to have to be, they'll come out with an explanation and then they'll have to come out with an explanation about their explanation because.
And they said it's a bunch that they expect a bunch of them to be, it says it has to be 30% US. Well, they said maybe it'll be 10%, then 20, then 30 in a couple of years.
Yeah,
or whatever the numbers are.
And what constitutes it? There was an interesting article I read that inverter companies are perhaps being much more reluctant to relocate here to the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a lot of solar companies coming into the U.S., but the inverter companies are going, you know what? You haven't really told us what it means to be a U.S. manufacturer. So we're not going to invest that kind of infrastructure. Because if I use computer chips, well,
mm-hmm.
Do I have to use U.S. made computer chips? What about the metals? There's a lot of components that are part of any product. So
exactly.
Yep. Okay. Any other comments from the news portion?
I think that the labor is and scaling up the labor force for being able to install all this infrastructure is going to be a bottleneck that we're going to have to do a huge amount of training.
Yeah, the projections that I've seen from the U.S. Job and Service Administration or whatever it is say that currently we have about 300,000 people employed in the solar industry. They're saying that just to meet the targets, we have to have about 1 million people employed by 2030. So where are those folks coming from? Because at the same time, we're not talking about this in isolation. There are great, and all of the trades are needing people, the electricians, the plumbers, heating and air conditioning, manufacturing capacity. So all of these skilled trades are in a deficit position as far as getting people to work there. So how that's going to happen, I don't know. I'm getting contacted by a lot of community colleges and universities saying we want to ramp up the solar training, but they also have to ramp up their electrician and their electronics people and controls and, you know, lots of things. So yeah, I think our immigration bill is going to have to be, how can we get skilled people immigrating to the US? Because we're going to need them.
I was going to suggest hire some more Trinidadians. They'll gladly come up here and work.
Okay. All right. We'll bring everybody over. All right. Well, let me jump into the announcements here. All right. This is upcoming March 28th. That's today, actually, at 2 p.m. There's a webinar for opportunities in commercial and industrial solar projects. Again, I don't have the links on this presentation, but if you need them, try Googling them. If you can't get that, you can contact me directly and I will provide you what I have. But trying to give you a link that's 700 characters long is not going to be much help at the moment. Another one on the latest NFPA 70E. This is the safety issues from NFPA. That's on April 11th at 11:30 Eastern time. Nice webinar there. On the 12th at 1 p.m. Eastern, there's an upcoming webinar on EV charging energy management for workplaces, businesses, and fleets. I think this is going to be a big issue, especially when you talk about demand charges for your business if you're going to be doing EV charging. So that'll be interesting to see. That's a Wood Mackenzie webinar. And another from Wood Mackenzie on the 12th is on navigating the U.S. energy tax credits, sort of like what Don just brought up. How will you deal with those incentives? What do we know? And when did we know it? So that's coming up on the 12th Eastern. And then April 18th, navigating solar structure business. I assume there wasn't a lot of details on this one, but I assume that has to do with support structures like racking and things of that nature. But I might be wrong, but that was my assumption based on all I could find there. And then just to remind everybody, I did give this announcement last week, but we have someone who has a certain number of orphaned panels available. So if you want to get a hold of Sean, they've got just a few to get rid of. So I thought since if you got a very small project, something like this might be very helpful. Tell them to give them to you really cheap. Okay. So that's the announcements I have. Does anybody else have any announcements they want to share at the moment?
Yeah. I just shared it here, the plan for the solar farm project in Trinidad and Tobago. It's divided in two parts, but just in one part is somebody could always look at and share if you want.
Okay. I wasn't quite sure if I understood. What are you going to share something?
Yes, I posted a PDF document on your chat.
Oh, okay. All right. On an upcoming project?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So if anybody wants that, they should just get it from me, or I'll have that PDF link. Okay. All right. Anybody else have anything? Give me just a second. All right. So I'm going to jump in. Again, feel free to interrupt as I move through. But twice a year, EnergySage comes out with a update about the state of the marketplace. And I always think it's interesting to get a good deep dive there. So I thought I would go ahead and report it. It just came out this week, but this is on the second half and as a result, the totality of 2022. And the big takeaway from this report, and these are really focused on residential level solar projects. So the big takeaway is that prices keep going up. In fact, they've gone up. They went up 3% last year for residential solar projects. That's on average $2.85 per watt. Those are pre-incentive prices. So full retail, that's up about 7% from its low in 2021. So we have seen, and the graph does indicate a little bit of a steady increase, really, again, primarily because of supply chain disruptions and some of the tariffs and things like that that we've seen. That's the official explanation. I think part of it also is workforce issues. You know, people who are in the business are so busy that, you know, they're knocking up their prices a bit because, you know, they have so much work that's sort of what happens in those situations. The distribution of how these prices are, remember the median is $2.85, but the distribution is sort of all over the place. And this chart shows it from a low of about $1.75 per watt up to say $4.50, $4.75 a watt. There are a lot of factors that go into what is that price, what's the price you're going to end up getting, such as where you are located in the country, whether the system is large or small. Typically, the larger the system, the smaller per watt cost. So a lot of factors that are in there, but on average, and I usually tell folks when they ask that if the number is pretty far off of $3 a watt for just a simple grid-tied system with no battery backup, then you're probably not getting the best price that you can get. So, all right, so where are the states and how do the states factor in on these prices? Well, the highest average price or median price in the United States is in Indiana, $3.81 a watt, versus the lowest in Arizona at $2.38 a watt. Now, as I mentioned, some of the factors that factor in, one that I didn't mention is sunlight. You know, the more insulation that you have at a given location, then the lower the cost per watt is going to be. You know, you're going to have to install a few more panels in cold and dark Michigan than you are in Arizona. So it gives you a little bit of the distribution there. Cost is also a factor based on system size. And this graph indicates that very small systems, such 2 to 3 kilowatt systems, are going to be up over 3.25 per watt. Whereas once you get up around the 12 kW systems, then you're going to start getting into the 2.5. When I look at these numbers, you know, I know that they're reported as the medians and the averages, and this is based on good data. But my experience is they tend to be a little bit higher than this. Maybe it's just the part of the country. Another thing that does elevate the cost is if it's a ground-mounted system, because then you're going to be adding in some of the infrastructure there. And when you look at the cost of metal, you know, just the metal poles sticking into the ground, they've gone crazy. So that's going to add quite a bit of cost, a lot more cost than you would imagine. Storage prices are also going up. So when we look at the median storage cost, it was about a 4% increase over the year before. Interestingly, about 2/3 of all of the bids that are out there in the US do request that there be pricing for storage. Typically, when I'm doing the solar assessments, I'll usually recommend, even if the person is not requesting storage per se, say, well, why don't we put it, at least making it storage ready, battery ready, you know, that we've looked at your system and said, this is what we would have to do to incorporate storage into your system, whether that storage be a stationary battery system, or it could be an electric vehicle, making assumptions that that technology will come of age within the next couple of years. And it's funny, I've seen some farmers in the area, they'll say, well, I don't want an EV. And I say, okay, well, you will have an EV. You know, I mean, that's just the reality. So what kind of systems are being installed in the storage marketplace? And it's interesting because when we look it appears that Enphase is far and away the most popular of the battery storage systems out there in the residential area. And of course, that's largely because Enphase microinverters are far and away the most installed inverter system. And you've got to have an Enphase battery if you've got microinverters. The Tesla batteries in second place. Then you get Solar Edge batteries, LG Chem batteries also there. And really amongst those four items, you're up over 80%. Then you get Generac, which has made some inroads, and also RANs. But those are the most installed energy systems, which you would think they're not necessarily the lowest cost systems. In fact, this graph here will show that home grid energy, and that's not one I'm familiar with, but that was the lowest priced of the units that they were out there marketing or saying that, that showed up on their surveys. And when you compare against those prices, you can see that an Enphase system, for example, is 211% or twice as expensive as that baseline of home grid. So that's where we're at there as far as least expensive to most expensive. Why are people installing storage systems? Once again, the number one reason is to save some money, save money on utility rates. So that really has to do with self-consumption. In the past, most people, who don't think about this deeply are going to say, well, I need storage because in case the grid goes down. Well, 4 years ago or so, that was the main reason. That was the reason you needed battery backup if the grid goes down. But by having time of use pricing and all of the changes in net metering, people are starting to install batteries as a way to save money on their energy bills. If I'm over generating and the utility is only going to give me a very low wholesale cost for what I send back, I would rather store it and use it as opposed to, selling it for wholesale and buying for retail. I'd rather use what I've got and then, have that battery supply there. So what sizes are being installed? What system sizes for the most part are being installed in different parts of the country? What I guess the main takeaway from this survey on this part is that systems are getting bigger. And my guess is systems are getting bigger because electric vehicles are either now a reality at these locations or they're anticipated to be a reality soon. California typically has relatively small systems, but even so, they've gone from about 8 kW up to 8.5 kW. When you get into the Midwest, or North Carolina, those kind of places, you're really up over 12 kW on average for these systems. Florida, interesting, all the way up to 14.1. So I guess they've decided air conditioning is a viable use for solar, which is definitely a reality down there in Florida. So where are the bigger systems being installed? Well, of course, I think that's what is that, Arkansas, the largest systems there, 14, almost 15 kW, smallest out there in California. So I don't know, the average size, almost 11 kW. So once again, if people ask you, what are the averages? Well, apparently an average installation at the residential level is going to be 11 kW, and the average cost is going to be in the $3 per watt installed range. Oftentimes folks will ask me what kind of solar panels, what panel should I buy? I tend to think of solar panels as almost generic, but I know they're not, but I tend to think of them that way. But this survey will show you what are the most installed solar panels. And this year, REC Group surpassed Panasonic, and or actually surpassed Q-Cell. No, I think it's the other way around. Q-Cell surpassed REC as the #1 spec'd solar panel in the US. So as you work up that chart, Q-Cell is #1, REC #2, Panasonic 3, Silfab, and then you start getting up into some of the less often, but those first 4 look like they account for about 70% of the panels at the residential level that are installed in the US. But once again, if it's properly UL certified, if the price is right, you know, there are rating systems out there. We've talked about those in past sessions as far as the quality are concerned. You can look on the chart there for that. It escapes me what that's called at the moment, but you can look that up. Now, inverters definitely less choice in the marketplace. Really, it is between Enphase and Solar Edge. Continues to be. We've seen an erosion of Solar Edge as far as in comparison with Enphase. Enphase is all the way up around 60%. Solar Edge looks like they're, I'm just sort of guessing from that, but maybe another 30% or so. And SunPower is another microinverter system. So the microinverters are definitely being spec'd out when you get to the various residential systems. Now you get into larger commercial industrial systems, that's not going to be the case. But
Jay.
this next, yeah, Joe?
IQ8s.
Yeah.
What's the highest wattage solar panel you can hook up to it?
Oh, I'm gonna guess. I remember I looked at the specs on them just a couple of days ago. Seems to me they're rated at just at 300 watts, if I remember, but you can put up to, I'm thinking like 425, 430, maybe as much as 440, somewhere in there.
Are they?
Hey,
In that last slide, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Jay, are they planning on coming out with IQ9 or 10 or what? Do you know the details on that?
I'm sure so.
Eventually they will, but their IQ8s are still, I mean, the big innovation with the IQ8, IQ8 Plus was the fact that they can be used without batteries when the grid goes down, you know, assuming you have an auto disconnect. So they weren't really all that concerned necessarily about size of panel on these. Enphase is still kind of doing a 1-to-1 kind of thing where one microinverter, one panel, but there are microinverters out there in the market that will accept, you know, much higher wattages. In fact, multiple panels, you know, 800 watts, you know, they'll if that's your issue. So why are you asking, Joe? Are you wanting to put big panels on one microinverter or multiple panels on one microinverter?
I mean, it was the thought to
Yeah.
do, you know, one with a, you know, like a 500 watt panel.
Yeah. Well,
Hey.
you can find them. You can find them, but maybe not from Enphase.
Yeah,
Okay.
IQ8 has one that'll do 500 watts. They have multiple models.
Oh, okay. So yeah, they've got the IQ Plus, and then what is it, like an IQ, and then there's a IQ8D or something like that.
IQ8A
Oh, A.
will do
Okay.
500, and the IQ8H will also do 500.
Although the availability may be difficult. I remember looking at some distributors, and they did say they did not have that model available. So again, that might just be a temporary supply chain thing, or it might be that not all distributors are going to carry all models. So,
Okay, thanks.
Jay, do IQ8 have any 230 volt models instead of 240?
yeah, they have 3-phase and single phase. So I know they have 208, 240s, but I don't know. Are you guys on 250 volt down there?
230.
230. I don't know. You'd have to check. You'd have to check with them. That seems so close. Is it single phase 230?
We have 3-phase, and you can also do split phase 230, 115 to 230.
Yeah, and also I guess you'd have to check to see if the hertz are
60.
compliant. Are you on 60 hertz or 50?
60.
60. Okay. Yeah. I mean, my guess is these microinverters are designed to operate within like a plus or minus range, and 230 versus 240 seems close enough. I know I've had them actually change that voltage range. So they do have some flexibility, because if you're too close to a substation or whatever, you might get voltage that exceeds the tolerance level of a microinverter. And Enphase has been able to make those changes, you know, remotely to widen the tolerance acceptance of the microinverter. So my guess is they can probably do the same to lower it. I'm not, but that's, as I said, my guess.
Is
We have-
Go
what
ahead,
is the
Chris.
difference between the two number one selling panels, 1 and 2? Is it price or availability or?
Oh, when you're talking about between Q cells and
The two number one selling
REC.
ones?
Yeah, I don't know. It's probably all of those things, you know, availability. Some of them were caught up in the in that sort of lawsuit about, because some are manufactured in those nations in Southeastern Asia that were semi-embargoed, you know, for a while. So it might be that that's part of it, because I know Q cells was in there. I don't know about REC. I saw Boviet in that list. I know they were part of all of that. You know, so you might not have been able to get them, but could have just been marketing, could have been incentives. Maybe they gave you a free keychain if you bought theirs. Who knows? So, any other questions on those items?
Jay, one of the things I was wondering is that several years ago, the Regulatory Assistance Project came out with their Teaching the Duck to Fly 2 study. And they recommended, or they suggested, that thermal storage, especially with smart water heaters and things of that sort. And I know that there's another company in North Dakota, the Steffes company, is using thermal storage. And it's way cheaper to store hot water than it is to store, I mean, water is a lot cheaper than lithium.
Mhm.
And so there is the possibility of storing as thermal storage, either hot or cold, for air conditioning and for cold storage, and also heating. And it's the same hardware. So what are your thoughts about thermal storage as opposed to chemical storage?
Yeah, I mean, my first impression on that, I know it would work. I mean, basically, you're offsetting other fuels in the case of thermal, usually, whether it's integrated in with a heat pump of some sort or using it for hot water. So that is definitely a viable option. In larger systems, they've used thermal storage, you know, where they can actually utilize that as a power generating source. I'm thinking like concentrated solar as an example there. But I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen any commercial options. You mentioned a couple, but I'm not familiar with them. Conceptually, it seems good. I mean, thermal storage is a lot more efficient, for sure, and doesn't have the same environmental impact, negative impact, that lithium mining certainly does. It's probably harder to conceptualize for most customers how that's going to work. But if you can somehow market it in a way where they don't care, you know, you're just saying, here, we're going to store it in terms of hot water, and that's going to save you whatever, and it only adds this amount, and you're going to save that amount. But conceptually, sounds good to me, but.
There was a report recently out of Germany that talked about the cost of European heat pumps. And they were using a large thermal buffer tank And it's becoming, in Germany, it's becoming a very large thing. In fact, it's unusual to find a heat pump in Germany that doesn't have a buffer tank that will contribute to load shifting. And now this is all heating storage as opposed to cooling, but I think the same concept and the same heat pump could be used both in cooling as well as heating.
Yeah. Well, it does make sense, although I would worry that the same issue that happened with solar thermal and solar electric may happen here, where, you know, a lot of people in the early days, I'm thinking 2012, you know, they'd always market these two as the same, but the only thing they had in common was the word solar. There's an issue of one is an electrical trade and one is a plumbing trade. So when you start mixing those two together, there's coordination issues there that you've got to deal with. And I also feel like the integration of the electric vehicle as a battery storage system may make all of these thermal options more expensive in comparison as we go down that path. You know, in 2012, we used to say, well, solar thermal is like 70% efficient, and there's a lot of good advantages of doing solar thermal, and it costs too much to use electric for your hot water when you're talking about solar. Well, because the prices of solar electric came down so much, it became, and the solar thermal systems are still absurdly expensive, you know, it really became, now we don't talk much about solar thermal in a residential setting. You know, you just use solar electric to do your hot water heating. So
there was one other consideration, and that was the fact that heat pumps are generally made in two configurations. One is connecting where the installer has to connect the refrigerant lines, but then there's another type that's called a monoblock, and the monoblock is one that it's all of it is factory installed, and so all you have to do is connect plumbing fittings. So really all you have is plumbing connections, and it's water pressure instead of 600 pounds of 410A or some other refrigerant.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we'll see. And there was a comment in chat that just said, yeah, and there are less moving parts in a battery for sure. So that's always a consideration. Well, this diagram, when we talk about the inverter brands, I just found this very interesting. If you look at the map of the US, it really is divided between Enphase and SolarEdge for the most part as to what is the predominant inverter, except for two really obvious exceptions there. One is New York, and the other one is Tennessee. And I think these are for very different reasons. On my screen, it's covered up, but I'm thinking it's what, SunPower? Is that the one in New York that I'm remembering? I did look up to find out why New York is different there. And it really had to do with that particular microinverter is designed as an integrated system, and it's integrated in with a high efficiency solar panel. So it really had to do with lack of roof space. You wanted to get maximum generation on a minimal space. So that tended to be something that's marketed up in that region. It's a very expensive option, but it's highly efficient. So that was the New York. And then Tennessee, I think Solarc, probably Don can speak more to that as far as, you know, being remote. Solarc is more of an off-grid solution there. So anyway, I think that may just have to do with the remote nature and who knows, the survivalists like Don who want to wait out the zombie apocalypse, right?
It does. It's not so much survival. It's survival. If you're a mile off the road, you have to have electricity without, 10 poles in.
Yeah, at $10,000 a pole, it doesn't take a lot to make this an economically viable option.
Exactly.
Yep. I see a hand risen, Pete. Pete, you have your hand up there. You got a comment?
Let me know if you can hear me.
Yep, I can.
Okay, perfect. Storing heat can be expensive, but if anybody is storing heat for domestic hot water anyways, then I think there's very much the case to be using PV electricity to heat the water for DHW, which you're going to have on hand anyways. At that point, it's basically a free storage. And we do that here, DC direct, but you could do it with AC as well for situations where exporting to the grid is not advantageous at that time. That's what I wanted to say.
I think that's a fair point. When we talk about off-grid systems, like the Solarc system, for example, oftentimes you take that excess energy because there is no grid to backfeed. It would just be wasted. It would be an opportunity cost. So you store that. It's a diverted load that you store in terms of hot water. No reason why with a grid-tied system you couldn't do the same thing. You're basically diverting hot water. You're storing hot water rather than selling it back to the grid at wholesale rates. So I could see there being a really good market for a product that would just say, hey, rather than you sell your excess power back to the grid at 4 cents a kilowatt hour or whatever, why don't you heat up as much hot water as you need? And then when it maxes up, then you're back feeding the grid, but at least don't pay retail to heat your water. Use your own power to heat your water rather than sending it back to the grid. And I'm sure you could do that with all of these load management systems that are being built into the systems nowadays. I would imagine that should be kind of a standard operating procedure, I would hope.
Right, and that tank can be just a commodity water heater from the home center, and just powering the bottom element with surplus power, the top element left on the grid to make sure a guy doesn't run out.
Yeah. Another comment that just came up too had to do with underfloor heating systems that use water or glycol or something like that. That could be another load that you're diverting to. So you could just simply, with your load management system, saying, I'm going to prioritize these loads. And before I backfeed the grid, maybe set those up. So interesting. We'll come up with all sorts of new products. So speaking of coming up with new products, new customers, this was kind of the final item within this EnergySage report. It was a diagram that said, how are people getting into the world of renewable energy? How are customers being acquired? And what is sort of the gateway drug to renewable energy out there when these folks are putting in systems? And the number one was smart thermostats. So if you're in the business of selling solar, maybe that's something where if you can somehow link in with a smart thermostat company or whatever and say, can I get leads from these folks? Obviously, they're energy conscious. And then solar might be something else they want. Same with electric vehicles. Certainly, there should be some synergy between EV sales and solar installation. There should be relationships developed both ways. When you sell a solar installation, you should somehow be able to refer them to electric vehicle dealership and vice versa. Energy efficiency audits are the next one. Then, of course, some people, only about 13%, jump straight in with installing solar. It's usually something else that precedes that. And that's the report. We got a couple of minutes here. If anybody else has anything else you'd like to add in or any comments on that.
Devanan, yeah, I think it's kind of interesting looking at your report, saying that microinverters on SolarEdge, because SolarEdge uses power optimizers as part of their solutions. So it seems to me a lot of customers, at least in the residential market, is choosing to go the way we have these module-level power electronics on the solar panels, and then they have the microinverter, which to me is like rather than go with an SME or Fronos string inverter. I find it's just interesting that is the way most people are choosing to go.
Yeah, I think it is interesting, but it's also not surprising because since 2017, the National Electrical Code has basically, because of rapid shutdown, pretty much mandated that you put some sort of power electronic module level power electronic onto your rooftop installation. So you either have to go with microinverters or you have to go with power optimizers. Right there is SolarEdge and Enphase, so that the rapid shutdown, so the panel, the power shuts down at the panel when the grid goes down. Or if you're putting in a string inverter, you're still going to have to install some sort of module level power electronic that does rapid shutdown at the panel. So the rapid shutdown provision, which is designed to protect firefighters and first responders, since 2017 in the US, does require for rooftop installations that there be some device that turns off the power at the panel when the grid goes down. So that's sort of led us to this reality where optimizers or microinverters is the logical choice for residential systems.
What about commercial systems? What the report says on that in terms of inverters being used?
Yeah, for commercial systems, the reports I've seen is that it is still, the bigger the system, the more likely it will be a string inverter. If it is on top of a roof, they're still going to have to put in some sort of like a TIGO module level electronic device, but it will still be a larger string inverter that's part of that for the most part for commercial and industrial systems. Anybody else have anything? All right. Well, I think we've come to the end then, and we shall see you guys all next Tuesday. Thanks for your attention. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.